Or at least I started the recorder. This will get people.
Hey guys, everybody can hear what you're saying. The recorder's on.
We're going to go ahead and get started.
All right.
We're already recording. So what you're saying right now is being immortalized on the internet.
Can you tell us?
Yeah, when we get started in a minute, we're going to get started chapter 16.
Of what?
Proverbs. It's in the Old Testament.
Yo, did you see the look you give me? Like sped up or something?
And the title is Humility, Discernment, and Righteousness. Yes.
Did we pay the heat bill?
I didn't personally. But I don't touch the thermostat, so.
He's in church sleep.
Don't go by me, I'm weird. Okay, so when we start in a minute, we're going to start with chapter 16. But first, well, it may be the last time, since we've been off for a couple weeks, I thought I would do another round of Shakespeare, Ben Franklin. I'm going to read them. Shakespeare, Ben Franklin, or Proverbs. Okay, so one of these quotes is from William Shakespeare, one of them is from Ben Franklin, and one of them is from the book of Proverbs. I'll read each of them. First one, number one, is, "It is honorable for a man to stop striving, since any fool can start a quarrel." Second one, number two, is, "A fool thinks himself to be wise, but a wise man knows himself to be a fool." And the third one, number three, is, "The heart of a fool is in his mouth, but the mouth of a wise man is in his heart." I'll read them one more time. Okay. Other people want me to read it one more time, so I'll read it one more time. Number one is, "It is honorable for a man to stop striving, since any fool can start a quarrel." Number two is, "A fool thinks himself to be wise, but a wise man knows himself to be a fool." And number three is, "The heart of a fool is in his mouth, but the mouth of a wise man is in his heart." So one, two, three, and label them Shakespeare, Franklin, or Proverbs. I'll give everybody a minute. Well, or in your head. We'll go on the honor system.
Can I go first so you can let
No, we're going to go through all at the same
that
time.
your Protestant friend is back since you're recording. I'm going to just take this class as I would like Braveheart.
There you go. We'll never take your freedom.
Okay.
Okay, does everybody have guesses? Okay. Number one, "It is honorable for a man to stop striving, since any fool can start a quarrel."
Franklin.
Not Franklin. Did anybody think that was Shakespeare? That is actually from the book of Proverbs.
Well done.
Did anybody guess book of Proverbs for that one? No? Okay. Well, we're not doing too good. This one was tricky. Last one, like, everyone got right, so I tried to make this one harder. I guess I was successful. Okay, number two, "A fool thinks himself to be wise, but a wise man knows himself to be a fool."
That I thought was Shakespeare.
Shakespeare? Okay, that one is Shakespeare.
And the bottom one I thought was Proverbs.
Which means the bottom one, "The heart of a fool is in his mouth, but the mouth of a wise man is in his heart," is Ben Franklin.
See, I thought that was that's what I thought that was. I got it all wrong.
Did anybody get all of them? I don't think anybody did this time. I even got Mr. Bill.
You did.
Okay, so beyond just the fun of trying to guess, remember the point of Shakespeare, Ben Franklin, or Proverbs is that we've been talking about how Proverbs, and the idea of wisdom in general, is the idea that the things of God and the way we should live our life are built into the creation that we're a part of and that God has placed us in. And so you don't have to be one of the writers of scriptures or King Solomon to be able to look at the world around you and look at yourself and come to understand some of these things, which is why you see some similar things both in Proverbs and in wisdom that's outside the Bible. So we may be finishing up Proverbs next week, in which case this will probably be our last time. But if I do another one, I'll make it easier.
Please.
Okay, so Proverbs chapter 16. All the works of the humble are evident before the Lord, but the ungodly will be destroyed in the evil day. Every high-hearted man is unclean before the Lord, and he who joins hands with the unrighteous will not go unpunished. Now verse 2 reads very quickly. Every high-hearted man, that means proud. Every proud man is unclean before the Lord. We read that off very quickly, but remember the whole way of life of the Jewish people, as for Orthodox Jews today, surrounded this idea of cleanness and uncleanness. A good portion of your day was spent making sure that your house and everything in it was clean. Right? It was kosher. There wasn't any mildew, wasn't any mold, that all the leaven was stored properly, that everything was squared away, that you weren't wearing two different kinds of fabric. We read all those rules, right, about maintaining cleanliness. So this is a pretty bold statement in their society, that every proud man is unclean before the Lord. Right? This idea that regardless of what you do, regardless of keeping all the rules, if you're filled with pride, it's worthless. Right? And this is going to be the basis and part of Christ's critique of the Pharisees. Right? The Pharisees follow all the little rules. Right? Like he says, they wash the outside of the bowl, so that it looks nice. They keep all of those rules, but what's inside is something very different. That's going to be based on this kind of idea. And so in verse 3, it's going to kind of follow up on that. The beginning of a good way is to do righteous things, and this is more acceptable to God than to offer sacrifices. Right? Again, you have, the sacrificial system, going to the temple, offering sacrifices, going and worshiping. Right? That's good and God commands it. Right? But doing righteous things, doing good, doing what's right, following the law is better and more important than that. If you go and offer all your sacrifices and then go out and you're a wicked person, right? You come to church every Sunday and look nice, and then as soon as you leave, as soon as you leave, you're cutting people off in traffic and running red lights and figuring out ways to swindle people. Then the fact that you went to church isn't going to do you any good. It's not like you're going to arrive before the judgment seat and say, "Well, I went to church every Sunday." That's the rest of your week I have a question about. Right? He who seeks the Lord will find knowledge with righteousness, and those who seek him rightly will find peace. All the works of the Lord are with righteousness, but the ungodly man is kept for an evil day. There is an oracle on the lips of a king, and his mouth does not err in judgment. The weight of a scale is righteous before the Lord, for his works are righteous standards. This is, again, we talked about the weight of a scale. That was the most common way of swindling people at that time, right? Because everything was measured out with a balance scale. So you'd put something that weighed a shekel, over here, and then you'd fill up the other side till it matched. Well, you could say your weight was a shekel, and it could weigh just about anything. So you'd have people with heavy shekels and light shekels. So the point here is that the reason that kind of swindling is such an abomination before the Lord is because when God judges, He judges impartially. So that's the warning there, right? Remember when you're out there and you're measuring things out, that you too at some point in the future are going to be judged. Right? At some point in the future, God's going to measure you out. And His standards are going to be straight and strict, even if you're fudging a little bit, putting your thumb on the scale. Verse 8, he who does evil things is an abomination to a king, for the throne of a ruler is prepared with righteousness. Righteous lips are acceptable to a king, and he loves upright words. The wrath of a king is a messenger of death, but a wise man will appease him. The son of a king is in the light of life, and those acceptable to him are as a cloud of the latter rain. The abodes of wisdom are more to be chosen than gold, and the abodes of discernment are more to be chosen than silver. The paths of life turn away from evil, and the ways of righteousness are length of life. He who receives instruction shall be in good things, and he who heeds rebukes shall become wise. He who guards his own ways shall keep his own soul, and he who loves his life shall use his mouth sparingly. That's one of those. Verse 15. Guarding your own ways is talking about, being deliberate about what you do. The second part there is trickier. He who loves his life shall use his mouth sparingly, meaning not much. Meaning the less said the better, which means I'm in trouble. But better to say nothing than to speak wrongly. That is the idea that they're trying to get across. And it reminded me of St. Augustine and his work on the Trinity, which is now widely criticized by just about everyone. It was criticized by him after he wrote it, but in his preface, he said, it would have been better for me not to say anything at all about the Trinity. He said, because I don't really know anything about the Trinity. I can't really explain the Trinity, but a whole bunch of people asked me to say something about the Trinity, so here it is. But it probably would have been better if I'd never written this. And then later in his life, he basically said, I wish I had never written that.
Why is King James so totally different than what you're reading? I mean, it is totally nothing like what you're reading.
Let me take a look.
The Greek and the King James from Hebrew? Is that why?
Let me take a look.
It's all together.
I mean, it's like you're reading Greek.
And you're reading Hebrew.
And I'm reading Old English.
So the way it's numbered, the way it's been numbered.
No,
That's completely different.
Well, the verse numbers,
I'm talking about the Septuagint.
the verse numbers are off a little bit.
That's not all. It's
even
the-
the meanings are different.
Yeah, text is all.
Right, but if you, the translation's different. But if you look at
What's the 18 say?
well, that's what I'm saying. The verses,
What he's about to say is that what
Yeah.
it should be.
verse 18 in the King James, right? That's something like pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall.
Right.
Is verse 16,
Verse 16.
verse 16 in the Orthodox Study Bible.
Does it say the same thing?
That's yeah, but the verses are off. The verse numbers are off.
Right.
Yeah, and the translation is different. Both. So both of those are.
That pride goes before the fall. Is that verse? Pride goes before the fall. Is that?
That's where that comes
It's the
from.
same
Yeah,
thing,
yeah,
That's
yeah.
That's what I
And so, for example, and then 17. It looks like it's about 2 verses off.
think. Yeah.
It's 2 verses off.
Yeah, and a different translation. But but if you go 2 verses ahead of whatever I say the verse is, it'll be a little a little closer. Okay. But so what that's talking about with speaking sort of goes against our societal grain. Right? Our societal grain is everyone's entitled to their opinion, right? So everybody's entitled to their opinion about everything.
I'm just speaking my mind.
Yeah. So the idea that there are a lot of things that are better left unsaid, right? It might be better to say nothing most of the time, can be a little foreign to us, right? But that's this is going to be a constant refrain in wisdom literature that we read, is listening a lot and speaking little. And that's how you become wise, and that's a good path to
It's the reason
to a godly life.
that in good Byzantine iconography, ears are large, eyes are large,
And mouths are tiny.
little teeny.
And you don't see word balloons either.
No.
You see, no, I mean, it's not people speaking, it's you see scrolls.
You see scrolls, right? It's written.
Yeah. Okay. So verse 16 or 18. Arrogance goes before destruction and folly before a fall. And that's where the phrase, the King James of that, is where the phrase pride goeth before a fall comes from. A gentle mind with humility is better than he who divides spoils with the arrogant. A man wise in his deeds is a discoverer of good things, but he who trusts in God is the most blessed. Men call the wise and understanding worthless, but those pleasing in speech will increase in understanding. Understanding is a fountain of life to those who possess it, but the instruction of those without discernment is evil. The heart of a wise man shall understand the things from his own mouth, and he shall carry knowledge upon his lips. Good words are a honeycomb, and their sweetness is a healing of the soul. There are ways that seem right to a man, however their ends look to the depths of Hades. We've seen similar verses to that and quoted people. But again, that's talking about this idea of these two ways. Right? That this is, again, this idea of we're all entitled to our own opinion. Well, yes, you are. Unfortunately, following my own opinion and my own judgment is a pretty good way to end up on the wrong road. A man labors diligently for himself and expels destruction from himself. However, a perverse man carries destruction on his lips. A man without discernment digs up evil things for himself and stores up fire on his own lips. A perverse man spreads evil things, and a torch of deceit kindles evils and separates friends. A lawless man makes a trial of friends and leads them in ways not good. A man sets his eyes to calculate perverse things and determines every evil thing with his lips. This man is a furnace of wickedness. Old age is a crown of dignity, but it is found in the ways of righteousness. I'm going to stop there for a second. This is another one of those verses that's sort of going to their culture at the time. Right? It should go to our culture, but unfortunately doesn't so much anymore. But at least in their culture at the time, people who were advanced in age were respected. Right? People who were advanced in age were respected. They're considered to have been blessed by God to have this long life. Right? Because not that many people got that long of a life. So this was a great blessing from God. Those people were looked up to and respected. They should be in our culture too. But the point that's being made here is, yes, old age is a crown of dignity. Oh, it's a good thing. But it is found in the ways of righteousness. Right? Meaning, just being old, if you're wicked, isn't going to get you anywhere. Right? It's just having, like all the other blessings, just having wealth, if you're wicked, isn't going to get you anywhere. Right? Having a lot of children and a big family, if you're wicked, isn't going to really get you anywhere. Same thing with old age. With all those blessings, the key to it, what makes it a blessing, is that you've lived a life of righteousness. Verse 30, a patient man is better than a strong man, and he who controls his temper is better than he who captures a city. I think the Hebrew version that is, better a patient man than a warrior, a man who controls his temper than one who takes a city. The original Hebrew of that is something like, all things come to a patient man, and that's better than he who conquers a city. Meaning, if you're patient, you develop patience, and you're able to wait, eventually everything will come to you. And that's better than the person who goes out and seizes something now. right? And this is probably the first measure. We're going to get a little more about patience. Patience is one of those virtues that's really hard to cultivate because, for example, we want to be patient, but we want to be patient right now. And sort of, right?
Before we blow the top.
We immediately find the problem. We're not patient about becoming patient.
Define patient. Does that mean waiting 5 minutes or 5 years?
Patience isn't being able to wait. Patience is being able to take the long view. Patience is being able to remove yourself from a situation and see the bigger picture and understand it. Okay, that's what patience is. The opposite being of patience being that you're consumed by whatever situation you're in, whether it's anger or hurt or joy or good or bad. That you're just consumed with whatever is going on right now and sort of blown about, that you're not. And so that's why it's particularly talked about, we're going to see in the New Testament when we get there in a couple of years here. It talks about patience in terms of suffering. Right? That when we're suffering, we don't become consumed with the pain and the grief and whatever else we're going through right now. But that we're able to look to the bigger picture, right, and see how that fits into the whole of our lives. Because when we're able to do that, then we're able to endure suffering. Okay, and then verse 31, all evil things come into the bosoms of the unrighteous, but all righteous things come from the Lord. Verse 17, better is a morsel with enjoyment and peace than a house full of many good things and unrighteous sacrifices with quarreling. That's another one that I kind of like the Hebrew better. Better a dry crust with peace and quiet than a house full of feasting with strife.
Even on a Friday night?
Even on a Friday night. This is another one of those wisdom issues where we tend to think that some set of things will make us happy, that solve our problems. I talk about this in confession sometimes with St. John Cashin when he talks about his anger. When he first became a monk and he had a problem with anger, he went to the abbot and he said, these other monks are driving me nuts. I'm angry all the time. I can't pray. I can't focus. I need you to give me permission to go out and be a hermit. Because if I could just get away from all these other monks, then I'd be fine. I wouldn't have all these anger problems. Right? So the abbot gives him permission and he goes out. And the first thing that happens is he sits down to write something and the tip of his stylus breaks off. So he's mad at the reed he was trying to write. Right? And then he hit his foot on a rock and he got mad at the rock. Right? Well, the rock and the reed didn't do anything. Right? They're not people. Right? And so the idea being he realized that the anger was inside himself. And so it didn't matter who he was with or what was going on. Right? That he was still going to have to deal with that anger. That's what this is pointing to. Right? Our house, our family, we'd be happy if we just had a little more money. Right? If we just had this, if we just had that. Right? The point is, no. You could have all the money in the world and you'd still be at each other's throats. Right? Or, alternatively, you could have a crust of bread and be at peace with each other and love each other. Which would you rather have in the long run?
I'll take
This
the
is
crust
saying,
of bread.
take the crust of bread. Right? Take the crust of bread.
I'd rather have the wealth and be at peace with each other.
Well, if you can get the both and, that's good too. But if you have to choose one or the other, right?
Well, what I was just thinking is that this seems to be, if you just look at it as literature, of truisms, colloquialisms, from that era of time, okay?
Right.
Because I think even in the United States, what is it, birds of a feather flock together? these sayings, and they're in some book someplace, which is also like, I think of the man, who was it, Will Rogers?
Yeah.
And the common sense that he would say, never met a man I didn't like, I know what I read, all I know is what I read in the papers, just common sense type things. And could we say that this is what Proverbs is sort of common sense type things for our own guidance?
Right. Well, in that sense, that's what we were talking about before. That these are observations made by a wise man, thousands of years ago, right? But he's living in the same world that we live in now.
Yes.
And human beings are pretty much the same. Right? I think we've seen, as we've been going through the Old Testament, reading these Old Testament stories, we like to think we're more sophisticated and smarter and everything than they are. But it's a lot of the same stuff. What goes around comes around. There's another one of those things. But and so these insights, are accessible to everyone. To Will Rogers, to Mark Twain, to Ben Franklin, to William Shakespeare. Right? They're accessible to everyone. The difference is these, of course, are sort of divinely fact-checked. Right? These are in a context that we know that they're directly connected to the truth that is Jesus Christ. Right? But they're not wholly dissimilar from what, and that's why in as I mentioned before, in terms of wisdom literature, in Romans 1, this is why St. Paul says to the pagan Romans who are now becoming Christians, who want to say, hey, we didn't have the Old Testament, we didn't have any of this stuff, what were we supposed to do? He says, no, you could see from the creation that God put you in. Right? He manifested himself in his creation. You should have known better than to go out and commit fornication, commit adultery, steal, murder. You knew, you just could have known. You knew all these things. Right? And you went and did them anyway. And so you're just as without excuse as anyone else. Because this was there in yourselves and in the creation for you to see.
I just have another thought.
Okay.
Well, in the creation, since you said about
Yeah.
what you brought up, okay, the way the Lord creates us, we are definitely on the, and we must be compassionate and look toward one another really to survive, okay, in our life and in our spiritual walk. My question is, and I've often wondered why God, all things being equal, would make so many people with so many different deficiencies. What is one of the gifts of the Spirit is patience. I don't know where I was when God passed that out, but apparently I wasn't there.
Yeah.
You get it, okay? And I'm an impatient individual.
Well, see, you're looking at it pessimistically. God didn't create all these people with all these deficiencies. He created people with all these different gifts. And sometimes your gifts run afoul of their lack of gifts. and
I'm
we
really confused.
well, no, and we in our pride, don't have a lot of tolerance for people who don't think exactly the way we do or treat us the way we think we deserve to be treated.
Then to the Proverbs, and is our mission then to subdue our passions, whatever they may be? Is our mission in life to be totally and completely humble with humility and have no ego whatsoever?
That'd be good.
That would be that's a good start. That's a good start.
I'm nowhere near there.
The one thing, too, that you always have to remember, obviously, God is the creator. But there's the fall. And humankind and all the other things within the creation now is in a fallen state, which which really does, in effect, distort humanity as created by God. Okay. And I've lost my thought, but basically it's the reason for most of the differences between, not that human beings would all be equal in God's perfect creation. You know, God would be boring as heck. But at the same time, it's the fallen world and human beings created good by God living in it are all pulled in different directions because of the circumstances they find themselves in and reacting to.
Yeah, but that also comes with freedom of choice that he gives.
And
Right.
there's no doubt about it.
It all balances out.
He creates us with freedom of choice. Yeah.
He give us a way.
We can want God or not want God.
That's right. So it boils down to how do you feel about it? Because this person over here, they don't like you, but you can pray for them, but that don't mean they're going to change your mind. So you're the one that has to say, well, okay, Lord, I've done what I can do. But I can't go over and kill them just because they don't like me.
Well, that element of choice is important.
Yeah.
Because we leave it out a lot, right? That's a quote I found while I was looking for these from Ben Franklin that I liked. He said, "Everyone is born ignorant, but it takes real work to stay stupid." So we're all born not know. The idea being we're all born not knowing anything, right? We're born not knowing anything, but once we're adults. Especially if we're adults in the Western world who have gone through some kind of education system at least, right? And who understand these things. A lot of the times we like to say about ourselves or give other people the benefit of the doubt and say they just don't know. Right? But the reality is a lot of times there's things that we choose not to know. Right? For example, those Romans that St. Paul was writing to again. Right? Who are sitting there saying, well, we didn't have the law. We didn't have the Torah. Right? St. Paul's saying, you didn't know adultery was wrong. Maybe you didn't want to know it was wrong, right? Because you wanted to do it. But you knew it was wrong. You didn't know murder, theft, whatever else you were doing. You didn't know those things were wrong. I think you did know those things were wrong. You just... And so he talks about them having, in Romans 1, he talks about them having suppressed the truth in unrighteousness. Meaning, they took the truth that they knew and they pushed it down somewhere. It sort of became deliberately ignorant. Right? So they wouldn't have to face up to what they were doing.
Well then, can we say that God has created us all equal because He has given us a conscience? However, in our society, that conscience may not be the same as another society. Whatever it may be, of Western culture or Mideast culture, what we have grown to understand as, what I'm trying to say is if we were to go to another area of the world, okay, there are some practices that we consider totally barbaric. However, do they know the difference of right and wrong as we would know the difference of right and wrong without any instruction, without anything? Is man inherently righteous with what he knows to be right? If so, then why so many churches?
Well, I think you're looking for the equality on the wrong end. It isn't that we all start out equal or even that we all live equal. The equality comes at the other end. The equality comes at the end of judgment. Where Christ tells us, those of you who have been given much, from you much will be required. Those of you who have been given little, little will be required. That's where the equality comes in. So, yes, it's a great blessing for us, to be here in the Western world, to have all the things we have, to be able to freely come to church. right? To have the Orthodox Church here, to have the truth proclaimed to us, to read the scriptures, right? All these blessings. That means we're going to be held to a much higher standard than your proverbial person in another culture who's never heard of Christianity. Right? God's going to judge him. I don't know exactly how. But he's told me that I'm going to be held to a much higher standard because of everything that I've been given. That's where the equality comes. It comes on the day of judgment when every human being who's ever lived stands in front of Christ on a level playing field.
I just can't see any of this in any situation standing righteous without forgiveness before the Lord.
Oh, of course. Of course.
I just can't.
Of course.
I even think of the Native American Indian and reading their different writings, how beautiful and spiritual. And yet I also realize how they warred on each other for whatever reason may be. And those battles were very violent. They were to the death of the whole tribe.
Yeah.
Called freedom of choice.
Yeah, that's part of that truth. Isn't just it's not. Don't get the idea from the way I've been talking about this that there's these two ways, good and evil, and we can see these in nature and stuff. Don't think that what I'm talking about ultimately is morality. That's not what I'm talking about. Okay. Morality and a buck will get you a cup of coffee, but not at Starbucks. It's like $5. Okay, that's so I'm not talking about morality. I'm talking about what's written into. We talked about. I think on the second day we were in Proverbs. We talked about that Christ is the way that leads to life. Right? So when I talk about this being built in, I'm not talking about just some morals, do this, don't do that. I'm talking about Christ himself, meaning not just the moral law, but also the fact that we've broken it, the fact that we need repentance and forgiveness. Right? That all of that is written there.
In other words, when I die, I will be held to a higher standard than someone remote from the Congo of Africa.
Who's never heard of Jesus in his life. Yeah. Yeah. You're going to have to give an account for what you did with what God gave you. It's like the parable of the talents. He gives the one servant 10 talents, 1 5, 1 1. Right? They're given different amounts. But then when he returns, they're held to account for what they did with what they were given. Right? And the one with 5 wasn't condemned because he didn't have as many as the one with 10. Right? It was what he did with those 5 that he had. Same idea. So we're going to have to give an account for what we've done with the life God gave us. Not for some theoretical other life, but the actual, actual life, the actual understanding, the actual knowledge that he gave us, what we did with it.
I'm sorry, but I was just we had a previous conversation, if you recall, about call upon the name of the Lord and you'll be saved.
Yeah.
And you said that's Israel, and you and I talked about that. Well, the thing of it is, you can trap a person if you go into the book of Acts. But Peter says, what must I do to be saved? I've got to be baptized. I've got to repent. I've got to change. And therein, sometimes people who say, well, I'll just call upon the Lord and I'll be fine, because that's what it says in the Bible. But the more that we go into our studies, and I'm sorry to say this, the more depressed Mr. Bill gets, because I just this one Proverbs, so my repentance is not into my own thinking, my own judgment, is not good enough for what Christ requires of me. And it's 24/7 focusing on Christ, and I don't know how any human being can really do that without His help. Does that make sense?
Well,
Bingo.
right. Well, you're ready to become a Christian.
Bingo.
You're about to get saved. No.
Can't do it without Christ.
Excuse me. Sorry.
Can't do it without Christ. You hit the nail on the head.
Right. And that's the reality. And this is why St. Paul says, for example, that it's no longer he who lives, but Christ in him. Right? You were talking about your ego.
In weakness is my strength.
Right? Your ego going away. Right? Earlier?
It's hard to subdue.
That's what St. Paul is talking about. Ego is the Greek word for I.
Yes.
That the I, in St. Paul's case, the Paul of Tarsus, had to go away, had to die. Right? So that Christ could live in him. Right? Because Paul of Tarsus couldn't do what he was commanded to do either. That's what he realized. Coming out of Pharisaism, coming out of being a Pharisee, which said, well, we've got this all organized. If you just follow all these rules, you're good. Right? And he followed them all, and he still wasn't good. And he realized that. He said, I can't do it. Can't do it. So I needs to go away. I needs to die.
Then how do we, here and now on this earth, stand in the presence of the Lord? I'm reading another book written by a woman, beautiful, who believes, yes, you can, to stand in His presence. And the way she writes is most beautiful. I really like it. It's called Jesus is Calling. Neat girl. I really like what she's saying. So how, as we Orthodox, how, as we Christians, how, as we individuals, can find ourselves and make that journey to the presence of the Lord for that moment? I believe you can do it at the altar when you all take communion. I believe that's one of the places you can find it. But again, that's the individual.
Well, that's. And this goes back to the conversation we were having before class. It's not something we achieve or attain to ourselves. It's something that Christ brings and gives to us and brings us into. If we're able to stand in Christ's presence, it's because He's brought us into His presence.
Right, you don't take communion, you receive communion.
Right.
Yeah.
We're brought into His presence. And that's what the Desert Fathers are always talking about, with being crucified every day, that they got from St. Paul, putting our own selves, our own I, our own ego to death every day. Or what St. Paul calls the old man.
Yes.
In order that the new man can come into being in us. That's right, and so that's part of what I'm getting at when I say this way that leads to life isn't just keeping a bunch of moral rules and being a quote-unquote good guy. Right? It's Christ Himself. It's finding Christ Himself. Being in Christ. And Christ being in us. That's how we're on that path. Whereas this path is us going the way we want to go. The way I want to go. The way that seems right to me, as we read a few minutes ago, that leads to the depths of Hades. Okay. Any other questions before we get back into? Okay. Chapter 17, verse 2. A servant with discernment shall rule over masters without discernment, and will divide portions among brethren. As silver and gold are tested in a furnace, so are chosen hearts before the Lord. An evil man heeds the tongue of the lawless, but a righteous man pays no attention to false lips. He who laughs at the poor provokes the one who made him, And he who rejoices in destruction will not be unpunished, but he who has compassion will be shown mercy. This is another important, here in verse 5. I don't know if you heard, especially in this translation, sort of the echoes from the Beatitudes. Right? Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. The opposite of showing mercy is laughing at the poor and those who rejoice in destruction. Now, laughing at the poor, obviously, that seems pretty dastardly. Right? I mean, that's the kind of thing you see in old movies. The guy with the top hat and the mustache, who's going to foreclose on Polly Pureheart's cabin, and right? Everything. I don't go around laughing at the poor, right, and the homeless. Maybe not literally, but the second part there, he who rejoices in destruction. That's something that might get at us a little more. At least when I was earlier today, I went and stopped to get a Sunday paper for my wife at CVS. And as I stood there waiting in line, there are all these magazines all around the cash register. They all had pictures of celebrities on them. And none of them were very flattering pictures of said celebrities. There was a lot of stuff about who had a drug problem and who got in trouble with the law, and it's not just magazines. You got TMZ, on TV and Entertainment Tonight, the 24-hour news channels anytime, wanting to tell you about Lindsay Lohan being in rehab again. And we sort of sit there, and as a culture at least, if not as individuals, we sit there and sort of eat that kind of stuff up. Right? Anybody who's rich or powerful or famous, as soon as, they mess up, right? Or as soon as something bad happens to them, ooh, I want to hear all about that, right? This is rejoicing in destruction. This is what they're talking about. Something bad happens to someone, and that makes us feel good, right? Because we resented them, or I don't know exactly what all is going on.
I'm not as bad as I thought.
Yeah, I'm not as bad as I thought I was, yeah. Makes me feel better about myself, yeah, my own life, by comparison. This, and of course, just outright vengeance. Somebody did something to us in the past, and we don't like them. Then something bad happens to them, and they finally got theirs, right? They finally got what was coming to them, right? Let me ask you a question for a second. If God took that attitude, how would we do?
I'd be on the expressway that way.
We were just talking about the day of judgment. Right? So, if God took pleasure in seeing people get what was coming to them, I'd be in a lot of trouble. Right? I'd be in a lot of trouble. If God thought it was just great when I ruined my life. Right? And so this is to be gotten at here. I expect mercy from God. I desperately hope for mercy from God, right? When I stand in front of Him for judgment. And so if I want that mercy for myself, then I need to show that same mercy to others. Whether it's the poor, people who are otherwise less fortunate, or whether it's, celebrities I barely know, or whether it's someone who's wronged me somehow or who I don't like. I need to show that same mercy to them if I expect to have a chance of seeing it myself. So verse 6, the crown of old men is children of children, and the boasting of children is their fathers. The entire world of goods belongs to the faithful, but to the faithless not even a penny. That's a nice modern translation. Faithful lips will not adapt to a man without discernment, nor lying lips to a righteous man. Instruction awards benefits to those using it, and wherever it turns, it prospers them. He who hides wrongdoing seeks love, but he who hates to cover them will separate friends and close relatives. What does that mean? He who hides wrongdoing seeks love. What? Is that the worst personal ad ever? He who hides wrongdoing seeks love. what that's talking about, this goes back to one of the very first stories we read way back in Genesis a couple of years ago. When we first started. Remember after the flood, right? We'd had all this build-up sort of before the flood that Noah was going to sort of save the world. You thought, oh, well, maybe he's that Messiah type person they were talking about. But then right after the flood, he goes out and he gets drunk. Remember? And he passes out, sprawled out naked on the ground. And you remember what happens? Of his 3 sons, his one son, Ham, sees him and thinks that's just hysterical, that his dad's passed out drunk. Sort of mocks him and goes and tells the other 2 brothers, hey, go check it out, Dad. Right? Whereas the other 2 come and take a blanket and without even looking at their dad, walk backwards and cover him up. Right? And sort of cover up his nudity and his shame. You know, at what he had done. So the he who hides wrongdoings, that's the idea that this is talking about. It's not, I did something wrong and now I'm going to hide it. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about he who hides the wrongdoings of others. Right? Of others, meaning, I find out you've done something. Right? You've done something. Rather than publicizing it, rather than shaming you, right? Rather than embarrassing you, I forgive you, we pretend it never happened. Right? The person who does that seeks love. Right? And the reason that seeks love is, what are you doing? You're giving love. You're showing love to whoever the person is. Right? So you get love in return. He who hates to cover them will separate friends and close relatives. That's what that says. The person who, every time someone does something to you that offends you, that upsets you, you know, you go and make a big deal. Did you hear what so-and-so did to me? That no good. You know, on and on. Right? What's that going to do? It's going to destroy your relationships. It's going to destroy all those bonds of love that you have with someone.
Not to mention if you tell secrets on people, not what they've done to you, the things that their friends and family are better off not knowing.
Right. Again, some things are better left unsaid. As when we started out. Okay. So verse 11, a threat breaks the heart of a man with discernment, but a man without discernment, though flogged, has no perception. Every evil man stirs up controversy, but the Lord will send him a merciless messenger. Care will befall a thoughtful man, but men without discernment devise evil things. He who repays evil for good, evil will not be removed from his house. The foundation of righteousness gives authority to words, but discord and quarreling precede poverty. He who judges the unrighteous as righteous, and the righteous as unrighteous, he is unclean and abominable before God. Why do goods belong to a man without discernment? For a heartless man is unable to gain wisdom. He who makes his own house lofty seeks destruction, and the one who turns away from learning will fall into evils. Let a friend be with you on every occasion, and let brethren be useful in necessities, for they are begotten for this reason. A man without discernment applauds and rejoices over himself, as also the one who gives himself as surety for his friend. He who loves sin rejoices in quarrels, and the hard-hearted man does not assemble with good men. You've noticed we've had a couple mentions of quarrels, in addition to this one up here for Proverbs. It's honorable for a man to stop striving, since any fool can start a quarrel. Right? And this is, I've commented on this before in Proverbs. Right? This idea that contrary to what you might think looking at the internet, right, that in our lives we should be seeking peace with each other. We should be trying to dwell together in peace and in unity. We should be looking for things we have in common, things we share, right, things we can gather together around, not looking for the differences between us that we can then argue about, right, and create separation. And that's not easy for some of us, right? Because some of us like a good argument, right? That's a fun way to pass the afternoon, is getting a good fight. Right? But ultimately, these things that we think are small, I like arguing over politics. I like arguing over, sports, or I like football. Yeah, I like arguing over sports. I like arguing over this. I like arguing over that. Though even those little arguments start to create rifts, right? Rifts that ultimately end up separating us. Right? And eventually they grow into something ugly and stupid, and we look at it and we say, how did this start? How did this start? We trace it back and it's like, oh, we had a stupid argument about something inconsequential. Right? And so it's in part it's another pride thing. That's what this. It's honorable for a man to stop striving, meaning it's honorable for a man to walk away from a fight. Why do you have to say that? Well, culturally, it may not make you look so honorable walking away from a fight. It may make you look like a wimp. Right? So you're a wimp, you're a cow, oh, you just walked away from a fight. Right? No, it's honorable to walk away from a fight. Because any idiot can start a fight. Any fool can start a fight. Anyone can come and disrupt unity. It's honorable to be at peace. Blessed are the peacemakers. You bring people together. Verse 22, a changeable man will fall into evils with his tongue, and a heart without discernment is grief to the one possessing it. A father does not delight in an uninstructed son, but a son with discernment gladdens his mother. A cheerful heart makes a man healthy, but the bones of a sorrowful man dry him up. The way of a man who receives gifts unrighteously does not prosper, and the ungodly man shuns the way of righteousness. The face of a wise man shows understanding, but the eyes of the man without discernment are upon the ends of the earth. A son without discernment is wrath to a father, and grief to her who bore him. It is not good to punish a righteous man, nor is it holy to plot against righteous princes. He who refrains from uttering a harsh word is intelligent, and a long-suffering man has discernment. Wisdom shall be imputed to a man without understanding who asks for wisdom, and anyone who holds his peace will seem to have discernment. I like that last one because if you just don't say anything, you'll look wise. That's sort of. I've seen the quote. Another quote I found while I was doing these. It's credited to both Abraham Lincoln and Mark Twain. Is better to stay silent and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and prove it. Yeah. Yeah, remove all doubt. Yeah, remove all doubt. Right. So sometimes again, Okay, chapter 18. A man seeks a pretext when he wishes to separate from his friends, but he shall be reproached at every opportunity. A man lacking understanding has no need of wisdom, for he is rather led by lack of discernment. When an ungodly man comes into the depth of evil things, he acts contemptuously, but dishonor and reproach come upon him. A word in the heart of a man is deep water, and a river and a fountain of life spring up from it. It is not good to admire the person of the ungodly, nor is it holy to pervert righteousness and judgment. The lips of a man without discernment lead him into evil things, and his rash mouth calls upon death. The mouth of a man without discernment is destruction to him, and his lips are the snare of his soul. Fear destroys slothful men, and the souls of cowardly men shall hunger. Notice again in verse 8, we mentioned this a couple times before. In Proverbs, the opposite of laziness, the opposite of sloth, is courage. Right? And you see that again here. Fear destroys slothful men. People who are lazy, people do things, are considered cowardly. They're not willing to take risks. They're not willing to go and do what's needed to be done. He who does not heal himself by his works, he is the brother of him who maltreats himself. The name of the Lord is of great strength, and when the righteous run to it, they are exalted. The substance of a rich man is a strong city, and its glory casts a great shadow. Before its destruction, the heart of a man exalts itself, and before its glory, it humbles itself. Verse 12 there has that parallel again. Right before someone comes to destruction, they're rejoicing in how great they are. And right before someone comes into glory, they're humbling themselves. He who replies to a word before he hears it lacks discernment, and this is a reproach to him. This would solve a lot of arguments, including most of them between me and my wife, if I would actually listen to what she was saying before I responded. I admit it. So,
welcome to the club.
Yeah.
We're all guilty.
Again, this is that part about listening rather than speaking. Right? Too often we spend our whole conversation, the whole time the other person is talking, we're hearing wah, 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 because we're thinking about what we want to say when it's our turn. Right? Because what we have to say is going to be really important. I don't know what he's saying, but this is going to be good when when it's my turn. Right? And that way lies foolishness. Verse 14, a servant with discernment calms the anger of a man, but who can support a discouraged man? A heart of discernment gains perception, and the ears of the wise seek understanding. The gift of a man enlarges him and seats him beside princes. When a prosecutor speaks first, he seems righteous, but when the defendant examines his case, he is reproved. What's that saying? It's saying, when you hear one side of a story, it all seems to make perfect sense. Right? Someone comes to you and says, so-and-so did this, and so-and-so did this, and so-and-so did this, and you listen to the gossip, and you're like, well, that must be exactly what happened, because it all makes sense. Right? But if we actually wait and find out, oh, wait a minute, there's a whole other side to this that I didn't hear. Verse 18, an allotment of land ends controversies, and it determines the boundary between princes. A brother aided by his brother is like a strong and fortified city, and he is strong like a well-founded palace. From the fruits of his mouth a man fills his stomach, and from the fruits of his lips he will fill himself to the full. Life and death are in the hand of a tongue, and those who rule over it will eat the fruits thereof. Again, that's a lot of what we've been talking about, and St. James is going to pick that up. The Epistle of James, which we'll get to in a couple of years, where he talks about who can control the tongue. Right? Verse 22, he who finds a good wife finds benefits and receives cheerfulness from God. And verse 23, he who casts out a good wife casts out good things, and he who keeps adulteresses is without discernment and is ungodly. Why would you have to say that? That seems obvious. Right? Well, you have to consider the culture at the time. The culture at the time where women were essentially treated as property, right, by men. They're basically there so you could have kids, hopefully male kids. Right? That was your goal. Heirs to carry on your family name, your family inheritance. Right? So this shows, and especially since we're still in the Proverbs of Solomon. So he must have figured this out late in his life. that receiving a wife is receiving a great blessing from God. Right? Receiving a wife is a great blessing from God. And if you cast out a good wife to go and you're a fool. Right? You're a fool. And so there's a version of this that needs to be said to our culture today, where marriage is only popular if you're not allowed to get married. Among the people who are allowed to get married, they mostly don't want to get married, they just want to live together. Right? Temporarily. Right? And then we have people who aren't allowed to get married who want to get married. But marriage itself, this idea to be married, to have a husband or to have a wife, is to receive a good thing, to receive a blessing from God. Kind of gone in our culture too. Right? It's, well, I'm getting whatever out of this relationship for now, and as soon as I'm done getting anything out of this relationship, I will end it and move on to the next one. Right? Or if while this one's going on, I find something that looks better, I will I will head for that too. Right? There's no. This idea again is gone. The idea that finding a good woman or finding a good man and becoming married is a good thing, is a wonderful thing, is a blessing from God that we should see. And so that's important. It seems obvious, but it's important. And it's important that, especially for husbands, because this is talking to a culture where the men have all the rights and all the power and all the privilege, to say to them, they need to value their wives accordingly.
Well, yes, and what I'm thinking now is how easy it was in Israel for somebody to be divorced.
Yeah.
And yet...
You just hand her a writ of divorce.
Yeah.
That's it, you're divorced.
And Jesus speaks to that, okay? And he said, it wasn't this way, but since you wanted it, God...
Since you were hard-hearted, yeah.
Yeah, you were hard-hearted to do this. So here is something that is perfect. Then what do you do then in an imperfect world? We're already fallen then, and this is, coming out. So here we are in shall I say, conflict again? Because you can marry the wrong individual for all the right reasons.
Well, it does say, he who finds a good wife.
Oh, that's clarification.
It is a blessing.
A good one.
A good wife, right? So it's not just marry the first thing that comes along and the rest of your life will be wonderful. For either side, the first husband or the first wife.
Although there was that thing about saying with the wife,
Yeah.
Marriages already determined by their parents.
Usually. Herb was asking if marriages were usually arranged. And they usually were. But you would have incidents where people, that's why I was talking about the wife of your youth. Right? The wife who you got married to in the arranged marriage. If she died in childbirth, which happened a lot at that time in history, or died of something else, right? Then we saw in some cases men were required, if their brother died and hadn't had any children, they were required to take their brother's wife. So it was very real. If a man lived to be 50, he would probably have had more than one wife during his lifetime.
That's old age.
Yeah. And so after that first one, he would be the one, once he's an adult male, he would be the one making the arrangements.
Yeah, that was arranged for me to marry somebody else.
But I think you found a good wife.
Oh, yes.
That's the same. So, but that's what it was referring to. It said, "Blessed is he who's happy with the wife of his youth." Right? With that wife who he's first married to, who finds happiness there. It doesn't spend the rest of his life out looking for it somewhere else. Okay, chapter 19. A man's lack of discernment maltreats his ways, and in his heart he blames God. Wealth adds many friends, but the poor man is even forsaken by an existing friend. We've seen a verse like that before. Like all of a sudden, when you have some money, it's amazing how many friends you have. But also the first verse, to back up a second. A man's lack of discernment maltreats his ways, and in his heart he blames God. This is something we do all the time. Right? We make bad decisions, right, that result in bad things happening to us. And then once the bad things happen to us, we get mad at God. Why is God doing this to me? Right? Why did God give me that heart attack? Well, maybe all the French fries I ate gave me that heart attack. Right? And I chose to shove it in my mouth. Right? But we go and we make the foolish decision and say, "Why, God? Why? Why did you do this to me?" Well, we do it to ourselves, right? And then we blame him, sort of to add insult to injury, right? Verse 3, "A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he who accuses unrighteously shall not escape. Many men serve in the presence of kings, but every evil man becomes a reproach to another man. Every man who hates his poor brother shall be far from friendship. Good understanding will draw near those who know it, and a man with discernment will find it. He who does many evil things perfects wickedness, and he who provokes with words, he shall not be saved. He who gains discernment loves himself, and he who guards discernment will find good things. A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he who kindles evil will perish by it. Luxury is not profitable for a man without discernment, and it is not good if a servant begins to rule with arrogance. A merciful man is long-suffering, and his boast goes against the lawless. The anger of a king is like the roar of a lion, but as dew upon the grass, thus is his grace. A son without discernment is a disgrace to his father, and vows paid from the wage of a prostitute are not pure. This is verse 13 there. We talked about this a little bit last time, a couple weeks ago. I talked about, how we misinterpret the commandment, honor your father and your mother, right, in the Ten Commandments. That a lot of times, especially if you're a parent, you want to say it means obey me? It means do what I say. That's not what it means. It means that we should behave in a way that brings honor to our father and our mother. And so that's what we've already had several of these, but this is, a son without discernment is a disgrace to his father. Right? It doesn't matter if you've never disobeyed your father. It doesn't matter if you're always polite to your father. If you're going out and living a life of foolishness and of wickedness, right? That's not honoring your father. That's not honoring your father or your mother.
Father, in the King James, it talks about a wife, and you say it talks about a prostitute.
Let me see the verse
Right. It says that,
13.
yeah, the contingents of a wife are a continual dropping, and then the other one says a wife's quarreling is a continual dripping of rain. So where does the prostitute come? Do they think wives were prostitutes?
Well, no, I can guarantee it wasn't that. Okay. That's the difference between the Greek and the Hebrew.
Yeah.
The Hebrew wife is an interpretation there. It really says sort of a troublesome woman.
And then the Greeks thought a troublesome.
And the Greeks interpreted, I guess, troublesome woman as woman of ill repute. So what the Hebrew was getting at with that water dripping is sort of like, have you heard of the Chinese water torture? Where they have the drops of water hitting your forehead and it drives you nuts. That's what it's saying. The original Hebrew was aiming at was that having that kind of spouse was like the Chinese water torture. That it just sort of slowly drove you.
I think that's also true of husbands.
Yes, that's why I said spouse. Okay. Verse 14, fathers divide the house and property to their children, but a wife is suited to her husband by God. That's another interesting one, because the idea being well, even today, when you're leaving your inheritance, you have the right to do whatever you want with it, right? So you can leave it all to one of your children and nothing to the other ones. You can, split it evenly. You can do whatever you like, right? That's your job. You're going to apportion. You're going to give each one what you think they deserve, right? And what this is saying is, a wife or husband, a spouse, on the other hand, God gives us what He believes we need / deserve, right? That it's we apportion our own property. God apportions to us our spouse. And so there's...
So then he sometimes gives you a bad wife? Is that what it
No.
Or a bad husband?
No. What it's saying is that we get the spouse we deserve.
That's an old saying.
Yeah.
Get the spouse you deserve and get the
There's probably a lot of spouses who can
What it's saying is, sometimes we might look at our spouse right? And think, I wish he or she was more this way or that way or the other, right? Like as if we could, sort of put together, the spouse that we want, right? Which is the way inheritance would be done, right? I want to do it the way I want it. But the reality is that God has put that person together and put them with you in the way He wanted.
For your salvation.
Right, for our salvation, for what we need.
What you really need.
Which might not be what we necessarily want at any given moment.
Taking up your cross and following me has
Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes, despite my desires, Tricia does not realize how brilliant I am. and go with me on all our decision making, for example. Right? So yeah, that's
same problem, Father.
Yeah, it happens. But that's what we need.
Yeah.
We need someone to question our brilliance on occasion. All right, verse 15. Cowardice possesses a weak man, and the soul of the idle man will be hungry. He who guards the commandment keeps his soul, but he who despises his ways shall perish. The one who has mercy on the poor lends to God, and He will repay him according to his gift. That's an interesting one, right? That when we give money to the poor, when we give money to people who are needy, we're really lending it to God. Right? And this idea is what Christ picks up on a lot, like in the Sermon on the Mount. He'll talk about, when he talks about building up treasures in heaven. Right? This idea that when we do good in secret, right, then God has a reward waiting for us. As opposed to people who do things in order to be seen and get credit here on earth who already have their reward. Right? That there's a reward waiting for us.
This can probably send me to hell.
You remember earlier I said sometimes things are better left us?
I don't mind helping the poor. But these drug addicts that come out here and bum your money and just buy more drugs. A couple of times. This one guy, I had my own business. I was driving around.
We can't hear you.
To get some supplies. And he comes up to me, bumming $50. I said, "You don't want $50, you want a beer?" He said, "No, I want some coffee." I said, "No, you don't want coffee, you want a beer." He said, "No, I want coffee." So I opened the back of my truck, I poured him a cup of coffee. If looks could have killed, I'd have died on the spot. And another time, leaving church, going down, Mr. Bob Evans down here. This kid comes up to me. Said, "What's hungry?" He said, "You're really hungry?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Good." We go to Bob Evans, and I tell the nurse, they all knew who I was. Whoever he was, they had drinking a little beer. That man appreciated it.
Yeah.
This is the guy that wanted the coffee. Didn't appreciate the coffee at all.
Right.
So how can you determine who is poor and who just bumming money?
So Herb was asking, he gave a couple of examples, right? That when, someone who's poor or purports to be poor, right, comes to you and just asks for money. Sometimes they really need money, or they're really hungry and need food, or sometimes they're looking to get booze or drugs or, whatever. Sometimes they're just panhandling to make a living and they're actually not even poor. And I think the examples you gave were good examples. I'll reiterate here in a second. What we're asked to do is to show love for people. Right? And showing love for someone isn't giving them everything they ask for. You have kids, I know you should. Doesn't mean giving them everything they ask for, right? Doesn't mean always giving them what they want. right? It means giving them what they need when they need it as much as you're able, right? And so when someone approaches us and asks us for our help, what we're responsible to do is offer to fulfill their needs insofar as we can, as much as we can. Now, part of the problem, to put it back on us, is that a lot of time people approach us and want money, and we don't want to actually get involved with them, right? We don't want to take the time to walk to a restaurant with them, right? We don't want to take the time to talk to them, to really interact, really find out who they are, how they ended up here, what's going on. And so we want to try and have some switch. Should I give them money or should I not give them money? And the answer is either yes, always give them money, or no, never give them money. But again, what we're called to do is not to do anything with money, but to show love.
Yeah, but they don't want love. They want that dollar.
Well, if they don't want love and they walk away, then they walk away. Right? All they want, they may not even want money. They may just want somebody to listen to them for 20 minutes.
Well, 99% of the ones I've ran into want the
Well, okay. But they may legitimately want food. They may legitimately just want a cup of coffee. Spend 10 minutes talking to them and buy them a cup of coffee. They get mad and walk off because they really wanted drugs or booze, so be it. Right? But you've offered them love. Right? You've offered them what you're able to offer them. It's up to them whether they want to accept it or reject it, or what their real motives are. So that's what I would say. And in terms of helping the poor in general, I mean, we have charities that are established that do a good job of doing exactly what I talked about, of working with people, right? Of not just handing out money, but bringing people in, helping them, determine what their needs are, right? Helping them over long-term, form relationships with them. So that's another way we have to help the poor, right? Is to give to organizations like that are set up to offer that kind of contact and support to people. Yeah.
About next Christmas, I should be prepared to go off financially. I don't need so much.
Yeah.
My kids are here taking care of it.
Yeah. And that's what it's about. It's about freely offering what we have, what God's given us, right? To help people who need it. And there's lots of good charities that help the poor. There's one that my family has done a lot with, called Heifer International, that buys farm animals for people in poor countries. And they'll give them a goat that they can milk, sell the milk, right? And one of the conditions of being given one of these animals is that if you're given a pair to breed, that you pass on at least half of the offspring to other families in need. So there are lots of organizations set up all over the world and all over the place who have those kinds of relationships set up with people where they're really helping them, not just handing them a couple of bucks and not following through. Right. So you could use those organizations, and when you meet people, just offer them love. Right? If they don't want it, they don't want it.
Say offer. I'm what about those, you stopped at a stop sign and have this person
that will work for food.
Work for food or homeless, with their signs and so forth. And you're stuck there. I mean, I wind up going down the window and giving them something. I'm probably there.
Well, no, in
That's
the,
fine.
in the end, they're responsible for what they do with
Well,
it.
that's what I figured.
Yeah.
That's between them and God.
Right.
I'm trying.
Right, right, yeah. But, I mean, if you were in a different circumstance, I had a friend who had a pickup truck who used to, whenever he saw one of those guys that said, we'll work for food, he'd tell him to hop in the back and, to have him mow the lawn, have him fix up stuff around his house, then he'd cook up a big meal, and, serve it to him. And,
I remember a talk show guy on the radio one time, a fellow called in and he's in Texas, pulled off the ramp, guy had will work for food. So the guy stopped and he said, we had a storm out at my ranch, several trees came down, I've got the chainsaws and everything, if you come out, and work a couple days, I'll pay you, I'll feed you, I put you up. The guy says, why don't you just save time and just give me $1 or $2 now? And the guy looked at him, he said, St. Paul said, he who does not work shall not eat. And he says, and the guy looked at him and said, well, you and St. Paul and that horse you rode in on can use some profanity at it.
I can tell you a better one of that. We know a woman that lived over on South Hills. And I mean, this lady's got money. Well, this guy standing down at the bottom of the bridge every morning, bumming, freezing. So she goes someplace and buys this guy a coat. I mean, a winter coat. She goes down one morning, rolls around the side of the bridge, pulls off, gets this coat out of the car and takes it over to the old boy and hands it to him. And he looked at her and said, what the hell are you doing? She said, well, you're standing here every morning freezing to death. He said, I make money this way, lady. I don't want your damn coat. And she took the coat and took it back and got the money out of it. Said, yeah, I'm making money standing here freezing to death. Yeah, bought him this coat. He wouldn't stand there shaking. So people would give him money. She said, David, I'll never give nobody else another dime.
well, see, that's the problem.
Yeah, it really burned.
That's the problem.
It can't be that way.
Because she did the right thing by
Did
offering.
the right thing.
That's his decision. Right, and
I
that's
said,
his.
So what? Go back and get the $350 out of the coat and put the money in your pocket. But don't be mad. You tried to do right. God looks upon you because you did that.
Right.
And it's not going to do you any good. That old boy's going to be. I said, was he there this morning when you rolled off the field? Said he's standing there with that little thin jacket on shaking. I said, well, he's sitting there taking $150 a day off these people.
Freedom of choice again.
Yeah.
But that's so. But it's important. I remember we at one point back in my Protestant minister days, we took a bunch of teenagers from the church I was at in Phoenix and went up to Las Vegas, and in the winter especially, there's a lot of homeless people. Well, in Phoenix too, but in Las Vegas, they try to get west where it's warmer. And it was interesting how many of those kids from sort of a regular middle class background never connected that the homeless or homeless people are individual human beings. And there was one night we sent them to hand out jackets. Just to hand out jackets to these guys. Because at night, if you've ever been in Las Vegas or Arizona or any of those desert states at night, it gets unbelievably cold. So they're out handing out jackets, and this one girl came back to us just in tears. We were like, well, what happened? Right? We were worried somebody attacked her or something. Just in tears. And she said she went up to this guy to offer him a jacket, and he said his buddy was sick across the street. She should give it to him instead. right? And she lost it because she never, she actually experienced that these are people, these are human beings, and the idea that someone living on the street, in the middle of the night would say, "Don't give it to me, give it to him. He needs it more." My friend she couldn't understand it. She couldn't understand it. And so, that again, the key part is that we're treating the people who approach us as people. Right? It's people who Christ died for, people who are made in God's image. We're giving them that respect.
See Christ.
Right? And we're offering them our love and our compassion. If they want to reject it, that's up to them. And it should be a little sad if they reject it, same way God's sad when we reject His love and compassion. But that's our job, is to offer that. To offer that to people. Okay. So where was I? Let me finish this chapter. I think we're near the end of the chapter, weren't we?
We're on verse 17.
Okay, let's finish this chapter quick and then we'll be done for tonight. Instruct your son, for thus he shall be hopeful, but do not lift up your soul in arrogance. A malicious man shall be punished severely, and if he commits injury, he will also add this to his soul. Hear, my son, the instruction of your father, that you may become wise in your last days. There are many thoughts in the heart of a man, but the counsel of the Lord abides forever. Mercy is fruit to a man, and a poor righteous man is better than a rich liar. The fear of the Lord is unto life for a man, and he shall lodge without fear in places where knowledge is not examined. A man who hides his hands in his bosom unrighteously, he will not even bring them up to his mouth. When a pestilent man is punished, a man without discernment becomes more astute. But if you reprove a discerning man, he will understand perception. He who dishonors his father and pushes away his mother, he will be shamed and reproached. A son who forsakes guarding his father's instruction, he will think about evil sayings. He who becomes surety for an undiscerning child despises the ordinance, and the mouth of the ungodly swallows judgments. Lashes are prepared for the intemperate, and punishments for the shoulders of those without discernment. Okay, we finished chapter 19.
Verse 28.
Verse 28. Becoming a surety is the equivalent of co-signing. It basically means you're vouching for making a deposit for someone. Right? So the idea is you think you're doing them a favor, right, by doing this thing. But actually, you're not helping them or yourself.
Okay, see, this is where I find a lot of contradictions. Then we have the other one that, well, it's better just to kind of ignore wrongdoings and, we cover Noah. We'll talk about that receiving peace.
Right.
So, but then there's many things that also say, well, just don't associate yourself with people who aren't good because then you won't be tempted to sin. But I just find a lot of, and you think, yeah, that makes sense. And then you think, well, man's seeking peace. He will just overlook wrongdoing. There's just a lot of contradictions, I think.
Well, part of the wisdom is knowing what applies when. Right? Part of the wisdom is, for example, when your son comes to you and asks you to co-sign the loan. Right? You look at it and say, okay, how is my son living his life? How is he managing his finances? By co-signing this loan, am I helping him? Or am I helping him get into deeper debt and outer water financially? Right? Exposing myself at the same time. Am I really helping him or not? Right? That's what it's saying. So, none of these is sort of this blanket, like you just quote it and throw it out. Right? In fact, we're going to see probably next week, we're going to see, it's going to say, do not answer a fool according to his folly. And then a few verses later it says, answer a fool according to his folly. You want to talk about contradictions? But the idea is they apply in different circumstances. Right? And part of the wisdom is knowing, and we'll talk about that more, that is knowing when is the right time. Because when you're dealing with human beings, there aren't a lot of, like, well, if you just always act this way, everything will go perfectly. Right? Just always, anytime anybody sins against you, just ignore it. Well, no. I mean, sometimes a person needs to be corrected, right, to help their salvation. Sometimes, on the other hand, it's better to forgive and not speak. Well, not forget, but not speak of it again.
I
Right?
think that's what I really found today, because it's all the things about not talking or not saying anything, but then we've also had all the things about, well, it's not loving to not correct.
If you have a wise word at the right time,
So
right?
It's like, well, they both make sense, but totally different things.
We'll get that a little bit more into that next time.